Basic legal research when you're sued for debt. Brought to you by Kenneth Chabert at yourlegallagot.com. Your advantage if you're being sued by debt collectors. If you're being sued on a debt by a debt collector, you may need to do some legal research and write or respond to motions. Or you may even need it to write your answer to the petition. It's actually usually very easy to find most or all of the research or answers you need or probably ever will need already done for you. And you can also easily find the forms you need to follow. All this material is at the court, and it isn't hard to find or use. Of course, your legal leg up materials will give you some of that, but it's always better to have options, and this will give you some. So the first document you will confront as a defendant in a debt suit is the complaint or petition. If you look at a few of them, you'll see that they follow a very simple pattern. In fact, in my experience, all the suits filed by any given company against my clients have looked almost exactly the same. Of course, as a single person being sued by the company, you wouldn't know that. Only the numbers are changed from suit to suit. This isn't rocket science. They do it because they learned how to say what they wanted to say, and they do it again and again. That makes sense, right? And the flip side of that, though, is that once you have seen a response by somebody else, you'll know exactly what to say, too. So you should just take a look at someone else's answer to the petition filed against them by your debt collector. How do you do that? Easy. Every court has clerks, and these days almost all the courts also have computer records of every case filed in the jurisdiction. You'll even be able to get to them through the internet. To find out, go to your county or your jurisdiction's government page, and that will refer you to a court page or a judicial page, and from there you can figure out how to get into the court files. It may be run by the court itself or a private company, but it should be free. From there you can just kind of look stuff up, according to the way I describe later. If that doesn't work, though, if you can't get into the underlying documents, and that's fairly common because most courts don't scan the documents into the records or require electronic submissions yet, you may need just to go to the court and look at the physical documents in the first place. I like to do that anyway, actually. There's nothing like flipping through a file to give you ideas. So here's how you do that. You go to the court and you ask a clerk to direct you to the court's computer. And once there, you do a simple search. And that's the name of the company suing you, and make sure that it is as plaintiff. That'll bring up the cases in which that company is suing people as the plaintiff and not when people are suing it, although that might be interesting too. And there may be hundreds of entries brought up by this search, and if you go to the files, the physical files then, you'll see that almost every one begins with a petition that looks remarkably like yours. So let me backtrack and tell you that every court file has a number, and when you look at the case, you can copy down that number and give it to a clerk or somebody who's in charge of the physical files. That's how you get the files. So now you want to see the response. That's what's going to tell you what to do. And for this, you're going to want the pages now back on the computer that are sometimes called the docket sheets or sometimes called the case histories of a few of the cases that you found. And you want cases in which the party being sued is represented by a lawyer. And you'll find out that in debt cases especially, this is almost always the case when the case history is more than a few lines long, so they're easy to find. Although you're going to have to look through quite a few, most likely, because most debt cases are not defended, and not defended by people with lawyers. So it may take a while to find a case where there are lawyers. Don't worry, there are always some. Okay, so now you want to find an answer filed by a lawyer, and that'll be noted by the computer. Then go to the physical file, which in most cases will be located very close to the clerk's office. You have a right to inspect the files. They're public record, so ask to see them. Hand the clerk the file number and read the answer. See how easy it would be to copy or imitate? But always look up a couple of cases so that you can compare the answers you see, since answers, unlike the petitions, are not all written by the same lawyer, right? Because Defendants hire different lawyers, but the plaintiffs are always represented, and one company is always represented by the same lawyer. So the complaint or the petition will always be the same, but the answers will be different. And some of them might make a lot more sense to you than others. Moving on to motions. Motions would be more difficult if almost all the debt cases weren't the same. Since they are, however, and because collection lawyers aren't always interested in anything new, you'll see that the motions filed in almost all the debt cases are nearly identical. And this is likely to be true even when the company suing you is not involved with the motion and it's some other debt collector. And that's because legal parties tend to put everything available into their motions, and plaintiffs and defendants borrow freely from each other. And parties tend to use the same tricks over and over. So whether you have to use a file from your debt collector or some other debt collector, they're probably going to be using more or less the same tricks. You'll be able to find somebody who's dealt with the trick you're dealing with by looking up the files. Again, if you've got a motion that you want to file, just go back to the files for your debt collector and see if you can find the motion you're looking for in there. You probably will if you look at a few of the files. But if you can't, just find another debt collection case brought by a different debt collector and do the same sort of search. An easy way to find another debt collector is by getting some specific court's docket sheet. That's the schedule of cases to be heard for a particular day. And look for cases described the same as yours was. You know, petition on a debt, petition by a debt collector, that sort of thing. Again, it's the uniformity of action that is your friend here. If you're needing to file a motion to compel, that is probably because the debt collector routinely does not respond to discovery. You won't be the first. If the debt collector didn't answer your interrogatories or objected to them all, they probably did this because they never have the information or because it's their usual trick. And lawyers representing their defendant clients have wanted to prove this before you ever got sued, so they will have filed the motion you want to file. You just have to find it. Find it, get it, and copy it. You will want to use some care about copying motions. It isn't a question of whether or not you can copy, though. No one cares whether you're being original. There's very little premium on original thought in the law. What you want to do, though, is make sure that you make arguments that are appropriate to your case. Don't ask the court to force a party suing you to give you information you haven't requested. And don't ask the court to dismiss claims that weren't brought against you. You might be surprised how often that happens, and it doesn't take many of them to change the way the judge listens to you, in a bad way. So make sure that what you're using applies to your actual situation, but then copy away. You don't need to tell the court where you got what you're saying, but if the docket sheet shows that the judge granted the motion for someone else, you'll probably want to point that out. Remember that judges like to do the same thing each time for the same set of facts. That's just to be fair and consistent. And they probably also don't mind saving themselves the trouble of thinking through everything twice. So tell the court if a judge, especially if it's your judge, has already granted your motion for somebody else. There may be times when you need to do some research beyond the things that have already been filed in your court against your defendant. For help in that situation, please see the video on library research. You may not consider this video or anything I say in this or any video as legal advice. I can't give you legal advice, but as a former lawyer, I do know the legal process and debt law very well. So use what I say as a source of information and apply your own judgment to your case. To get more help on fighting debt collectors and their lawsuits, go to yourlegallegup.com. Get my litigation manual and forms. If you appreciate this video, please take a second and like it on YouTube, subscribe and friend me on YouTube, as these things will help others find my videos and begin to learn more about the debt litigation process. Defend yourself from the debt collectors.